Welcome to the Oshow. I'm Laura Babcock. And if there was any doubt that the scandal that has been rocking Ontario for the last 2 weeks is only growing, that was removed today with a bizarre press conference by the Premier, as though he was trying to do damage control, leveraging his personal folksy brand and taking incoming from the Queen's Park Press Gallery. But it did not go well. In fact, I think he made the scandal much worse, and he looked isolated and exhausted, standing there by himself without his housing minister at his side. I'm so pleased to have joining us here on the program for the first time, Keith Leslie. He, of course, was a Queen's Park reporter. He knows of what he speaks on this file. And Mark Cripps, who actually worked as the Director of Communications for the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So you know of what you speak when it comes to how things actually work at Queen's Park. Keith, let me go to you first. Did you see the press conference with the Premier, and what was your reaction to what you thought his strategy was going into it and what came out of it?
I'm not sure at all what the Premier hoped to achieve today. I really, even after it was over, I questioned one of my producers. I said, what did he get out of this? Why would he come out on a Friday in August when no one's really expecting him to come out unless he's got something substantial to say, i.e. my housing minister is stepping aside for a little while or something along those lines. But no, he comes out with just that same old, folks, we did a wartime effort to build houses. And every time he kept getting hammered by the reporters' questions, which was pretty obvious was going to happen. And he comes back with, you're stuck on the Greenbelt. I get it, but we got to move out. Holy cow. That was about the most tone-deaf thing he said since there was no preferential treatment and the ends justify the means, which has all been in the last 2 weeks, of course. So what he's hoping to gain out of this today, I don't know, but he didn't gain anything. As you said, I think he made the situation absolutely far worse. He kept talking, well, we're going to review the process. We've said, the process was too quick. Well, the Auditor General said the process was so fraudulent, so exaggerated that it couldn't be called a process anymore. It was an exercise, a political exercise. So that's what happened here. And for him not to come out today, and if he was going to say anything and it wasn't the housing minister is going to resign, he should have said, we're going to do that 15th recommendation from the Auditor General, not we're doing 14. We're going to review. She didn't even say undo it. She said review, re-examine. You couldn't even say that?
And yet he left the door open when he said that, these developers who have got these prime Greenbelt lands, if they don't make targets, he'll yank the land back into protection, which I think was a huge strategic error for him, because if it can be taken back in, it can be taken back in. And he has now put that out there. So what's stopping him from doing number 15 of the Auditor General's recommendations in the report? Let me just go to the press conference a little bit more, because I know Mark's been in meetings. And Mark, I want to paint for you at least some of what I put out on Twitter as some kind of my hot takes from it. And that is that he talked about how big Ontario was, GDP, et cetera, and then he said, it's too big for me to micromanage, and went on to say that he pretty much got the envelope or the information about what these land deals were going to be just before he was going into cabinet, which tells me that either he is incompetent because his single biggest policy file and his single biggest policy reversal is involved in this. So either he's incompetent and he's not managing his biggest file, or he's not telling us the truth. So he's either not being honest or he's not competent on a huge file like housing. So that was one thing that really struck me. And the other thing was when he said, folks, my job is to build houses. Well, no, Mr. Premier. That's your developer friend's job. Your job is the big picture, to honor municipalities and their hard worked on housing plans, to keep your promises and protect the environment for a stronger Ontario. So I'm watching him and going, so which is it? It's too big to micromanage. You didn't really know what was going on, but your real job is housing, not the bigger interests of a stronger Ontario. I mean, it just, to me, to your point, Keith, seemed like the only strategy at play was, oh, this is getting bad, folks. Got to get out in front of the cameras. Got to say folks a whole bunch of times. Talk about how I love the little people, and hopefully that same spin that worked on 2 majority elections is going to work here. So, Mark, that's pretty much what I heard coming out of the presser. But he did look small in the big cavernous Queen's Park all by himself, without his happy warriors at his side. It was optically, I thought, a very poor choice, and they overbargained on his personal appeal. But I want to hear what you think, because you've worked in there. Is it even possible that on a file that massive, the Premier would be, unaware of these big deals right before going into cabinet? Does any of it even make sense to you, Mark?
Well, I think Doug, the premier, has had a really rough week at AMO. They were, there was a lot of scoffing and some calls for resignations. That's one of their biggest signature events. That's where AMO is a massive deal. And when you have your major municipal association being very cynical and skeptical about what you're doing, that's a big hit. Yeah. Then there was a polling that came out yesterday that shows that not only the premier's popularity level is dropping, but the PC's fortunes politically are also dropping. So I think this probably all precipitated what happened today. I mean, I worked in the minister's office. I was a senior person in the minister's office. I know how the processes work. The process starts with the premier's office sending you policy ideas, policy mandate. Our mandate letters were all published when we were in government. So they see the idea. They say to you, to your minister, we want you to, so let's talk about the Greenbelt. We did the Greenbelt review in 2017. That came from the center. We undertake the review. We spent 36 months consulting with the public. And at the end of the day, we made some very minor boundary adjustments, which, of course, the premier keeps bringing up as somehow was a gift to friends, which I would like to know who they are because I was in all those meetings and I don't know who they were. I will say this, that during that time, I was approached by some of these developers at functions lobbying for their lands to be removed. One of the biggest ones is the Gasper's lands out in the eastern part of the GTA. He has been at this for 20 years. He took Dalton McGuinty to court when Dalton put those lands into the Greenbelt. I remember the process. We worked with the Ministry of Natural Resources. We work with our own staff. They come forward with recommendations. They tell you, is this legit? Do we need this? Should this be removed? In all occasions, we looked at 700 to 800 applications. We reviewed every single one. We looked at each one individually, and this is with the minister sitting around the table at the same time, right, in these meetings. And then we made decisions based on that, and the majority of those applications were rejected. That's how my experience was at Queen's Park, that everything that is signed off on is signed off by the minister in a meeting with the bureaucrats and the deputy minister, and everything happens together and those decisions are made, and then they're fed back into the center and then they're presented to cabinet. So unless they've changed the process of how they work, I find it really hard to believe that, the minister or the premier didn't know about this. And knowing how eager some of these proponents were to have their lands removed and connecting the dots to fundraising, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, Kathleen Wynne tried to remove this fundraising out of the system. And as soon as Ford was reelected, what did he do? He put it right back in. So, I mean, this was why she did this. Because the pressure from these developers. I remember I was in a meeting and we were talking about the Gasper's lands, and I said to my chief of staff, I said, why is there so much pressure? He said, because it's literally worth billions and billions of dollars.
And that's the ticket. This is as big a ticket item as it gets. Keith, let me go to you. As someone who has covered Queen's Park extensively, you know the anatomy of a scandal. You know how to watch narratives and shifting narratives, and you alluded to a couple of them earlier. First they came out of the gate with this double down, it's all about housing, did a bunch of housing pressers all over the place, with projects behind them, thinking that was going to be enough to say, we need this housing, it's urgent, it's a priority. And then people start to push back and go, yeah, but it's not going to be ready for years. It's not on serviceable land. It's not what, people have been asking for. Well, this is the only way we're going to get to our targets. But then people were like, no, actually, the municipalities already put together their strategies based on your targets, and you can do it through intensification without going to the Greenbelt. Well, it's because these immigrants are coming. Well, you know what? You should have known there's some immigration coming. Well, they need new houses. Oh, really? Are they going to be able to afford these houses? So line by line, it's getting dumber and dumber and dumber. And the people of Ontario, I think, are getting angrier and angrier because they're being treated like fools. So Keith, tell me how you're viewing this. Is the scandal only building in your mind?
Oh, yes, it's getting bigger. I mean, the 3D strategy of deny, defend, and deflect is just landing flat. The government, the premier today, oh, but $8 billion. Come on, it's 1/3 of 1% of the lands. It's a speck on a map. That line shows his commitment to the Greenbelt right there. It's a speck on a map. Why shouldn't these developers make some money off it? But don't be land banking. And you developers are like trying to look tough with the developers today while saying that. It's just ridiculous. I think clearly what we need to see more than anything at this point to keep this scandal really driven into this government is for PC MPPs to decide whether or not they're still in Ford Nation, where Ford has this Trumpian-like grip on the PC party, or whether some of these are going to start saying, you know what? I'm getting blasted every time I go out in my own constituency because people are really, really upset about this Greenbelt fiasco. It stinks. There's just something that smells about it. And they hear these things about envelopes being passed at industry dinners, and these same developers coming up with 92% of the lands that have been opened up into. Holy cow. This makes us all just, again, it just smells to the average voter, the average Ontarian. This just smells. And oh, by the way, there's a secret deal on Ontario Place with a 95-year lease. Don't worry about that. We'll tell you about that later. This is just the modus operandi for this government. It's time for PC MPPs to stand up, not just the opposition parties, not just the media, like, again, I don't understand why Ford came out today, because he could come out again on Monday and it's going to be the exact same news conference. Doesn't matter what he's announcing. He's getting those same questions again and again and again, at least until Steve Clark steps aside. Clark, who was the minister or the member who demanded ministerial accountability from every Liberal minister when they were in opposition, now somehow lost that concept completely. I'm sorry. I saw Greg Sobera resign at 9:30 at night over a slight mention in an RCMP report. He was the finance minister, deputy premier. It was big news. He took it on the chin, walked away for a few months, was cleared because it really didn't have any, and it was back, and that's how it's done. You step aside.
Well,
this minister.
You invoked Trump, and Ford does admire Trump. And today he sounded like he was trying to be Trump when I think it was Colin DeMello said to him, "What do you say, Premier, to people who say this looks like corruption?" And his response was, "That was a nasty question." Oh,
good thing it didn't come from a woman. He'd have called her a nasty woman, then we'd had a whole other thing.
Then we'd be over all the way over. But, you know, if you're going to try to double down and be shameless like Trump, you can't show up looking beleaguered and exhausted and pleading and talking, folks. It doesn't work, right? So he's trying to double down and come up with all these excuses, but they're wearing thin. He looks as though his support is wearing thin. I mean, if there was ever a time to have his cabinet standing behind him, it was today. Instead, we have an isolated looking premier. And your point about are these MPPs making calculations? I got to say, Keith, the Hamilton MPPs are getting pounded for defending Ford and even saying that council's being the problem, right? When we had 30,000+ Hamiltonians fight to stop urban sprawl and build within our urban boundary. And these MPPs are now fighting against that in what? In deference to Ford? And here Ford is standing alone. And Ford even said the developers weren't his friends. And when they brought up as you saw, Keith, that he got money from these guys, he goes, "I don't care about a $1,500 donation. I care about the little people." What a load of crap. You know, everyone knows that politics is funded by donors. You know, I was thinking he's getting some phone calls on that private little cell phone of his after that presser from the developers he said are not his friends, that he doesn't care about, that their donations are of nothing to him. It looked like he was just drowning with his message.
I don't give two hoots. He said, I don't give two hoots about the builders, and then I don't give two hoots about developers.
Right.
Really?
But he had lots of love for the municipalities. I think 3 times he talked about how great they were. And that goes to your observation from the AMO, the Ontario Municipalities Association conference. The fact that, you know, they are giving him a hard time. All 444 of them might have not bought his spin at AMO. He's there saying how great they are. But the developers, you know, persona non grata, doesn't know them, doesn't care about their money, and he'll take their land back if they don't live up to it. So Keith, just from a point of view strategically for his government, I felt like today he backed himself into a corner that I'm trying to strategize how he can ever make his way out of.
Well, you're right. He put himself out there. And when he was asked specifically about the OPP handing over after months of looking at this, handing it over to the RCMP, who of course bundled their thing and said it was an investigation, now it's an assessment. The police are knocking at the door. That makes as big a scandal as any government can ever face. Now, what happens once the police come through that door? And we know the Mounties can take their own sweet time about these things. So is that going to be hanging over this government forever? Or is it going to be something that's going to be in the middle of the next election cycle? Or is it going to be something we find out fairly quickly? Because let's face it, the RCM or the OPP must have turned over something, a substantial file. They've been looking for months into this. They must have turned over something and felt that it was worthy of the RCMP's attention. That alone has to have the government very scared. A bad policy reversal, a broken promise that initiated all this is turning into a real nightmare for this government. I don't see it backing down at all anytime soon.
Well, and the thing is, if it was just about the Greenbelt and taking that land for housing, that's an argument, a policy, maybe, a philosophical argument about the kind of housing we need in this province. But when there's $8 billion and people know to follow the money, and it's going to people that have donated, and only these couple, and there's those envelopes at that meeting, and they've now gotten rid of the staffer who took those envelopes, thrown them under the bus. I mean, everybody can see that and knows that that looks wrong. A couple of things we haven't talked about, and I want to get your assessment going forward. We've now got the Green Party coming out with, they want a public inquiry. We've got the NDP out there with a petition saying they want to get the House, the legislature back so that they can, force these lands to be put back in place. We have the RCMP changing their language to say that they're just assessing whether it'll be an investigation, but I can see there being pressure on them to go the full tilt on this. So where do you think this goes from here? Do you think there's ever going to be accountability? I have said, I think this stops at the feet of the Premier. I don't think the housing minister's long for his job, despite how confident Ford said he was in him today. But I want to just, as closing comments from the two of you, prognosticate for me based on your extensive experience at Queen's Park. Let me go first to you, Mark. What do you think is going to be coming on the horizon in this Greenbelt scandal?
I, at this point, I think they think they can ride this out. We've seen some senior Tory insiders say they really believe they can ride this out. So, I think that's going to come back to the public outrage and the political and public outrage. How far are we willing to go to defend the Greenbelt? For example, like if I'm a municipal mayor right now and I'm being subjected to these whims of government when I am doing everything I said I would do, I would just say no. You come and do it. Like, we need this kind of level of outrage now. We need people to put it all on the line. Do you care about the Greenbelt or not? Right? Do you really care about the Greenbelt or not? And it's such, that look, and the public are doing a great job. Lots of protests and stuff. That stuff will catch up with the government. And I think Keith said it well about the pressure on local MPPs. They're going to start to feel it. They can't hide and run forever.
And people have to call, right? You said that on the last Oshow you were on, Mark. People have to call. It's not enough. They have to send emails and call. It's not enough just to go and tweet about it.
I just think we're waiting. I think they're waiting for the Integrity Commissioner's report. I think you can't fire a minister twice. So I think they're waiting for or ask him to resign twice. So I think they're probably waiting for that or another shoe to drop before they make the final decision on Clark. And I think they're balancing that with, can we ride this out?
Mark just mentioned that the Integrity Commissioner is going to report. That's September. That's only a week away. So in the next few weeks, we're going to get that report. That's going to add more fuel to this. And of course, the Narwhals just reported, and they've done some excellent reporting on this, by the way, that the Information and Privacy Commissioner is looking at the next steps in looking at the deleted emails and the use of personal cell phones and personal email accounts during this whole Greenbelt fiasco. And as we'll go back to, here's one the Liberals don't like to think about. When the OPP did investigate, they didn't find a conflict. They investigated Dalton McGuinty's office, and they found his chief of staff, David Livingston, charged him. He was sentenced to 4 months in jail. I think he served about 3 weeks or so, but he went to jail. A former Liberal Premier's chief of staff went to jail over deleted emails and wiped hard drives. So don't discount this Information and Privacy Commissioner looking into deleted emails. That could be the real nugget that really holds him to the wall on this, if nothing else holds, because I'm not so sure about the Integrity Commissioner being able to do much other than maybe cause a minister's resignation. But the Info and Privacy Commissioner, that's you're getting into criminal behavior there, perhaps, or alleged. So that's something to really keep a close eye on.
Thank you all for watching the Oshow. You can, of course, subscribe on YouTube. This is a community-produced program. No one makes any money on this show. What we try to do is follow the money and keep our governments to account. So thank you so much for watching. And I'm sure there'll be more on the Greenbelt scandal as it builds. Take care.